Hi, everybody. I wanted to welcome you. My name is Savannah Bretthauer, and on behalf of Dr. Sasha Thomason, the Animal Facilities Inspection Program Director for the Kansas Department of Agriculture, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. I serve as the AFI investigator, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time today for this webinar, which is focused on managed shelter and rescue intake strategies. So for the next 60 minutes, we'll be focusing on managed intake, which is a proven strategy for shelters' best practices and is a way of managing when animals come in via appointments and offering support to people in the local community to encourage pet retention and intake diversion. This is important to KDA license holders because, as I'm sure you all know, the shelters are currently experiencing unprecedented animal numbers, not only here in Kansas, but in the US. Having shelters flooded with voluntary relinquishments is creating less room for strays, abandoned animals, and puts heavy stress on the staff. Overpopulation also makes it harder for the shelters to work with local law enforcement in the event of seizure due to hoarding, animal cruelty, or some other circumstances. Just a few housekeeping items before the session begins. During the presentation, a portion of this session, all participants' microphones will be muted by the meeting host. That's just so we don't have anybody talking over each other and background noises. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit your questions using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. KDA staff, myself, will be monitoring the chat for questions to be asked at the conclusion of the presentation. And lastly, this session is being recorded and will be posted online next week if anybody wants it. I'd like to introduce you guys to Tim Yeglin. Tim is with the Best Friends Animal Society. If you want to wave, Tim, everybody sees who you are. 35 years ago, a group of people made a leap of faith to realize a vision that they had long shared to create a sanctuary for abandoned and abused animals. This was the logical extension of the rescue and the advocacy work they had been doing for years. Little did they appreciate that their endeavor would catapult them into the forefront of a fledgling movement to end the killing of 17 million dogs and cats who were dying in our nation's shelters annually at the time. With little money, no master plan, few construction skills, and countless lives hanging in the balance, they set out to address a local aspect of a much larger problem. What they created instead was the largest no-kill animal sanctuary in the world and a national movement to the end of killing of companion animals. Born in Illinois, Tim found himself living in Indiana and Iowa before permanently settling down in Kansas. Tim's decade-long journey into animal welfare began by volunteering his master photography skills to take pictures of the adoptable dogs and cats at various Kansas City animal shelters. His love for shelters and their work led him to take a marketing position at a local shelter. He became the director of operations at the fledgling shelter and helped restructure it one department at a time. Tim is particularly good at teaching shelter dogs household manners for their adoptive homes. He is passionate about reducing the fear, anxiety, and the stress of all the animals and loves to strengthen the human-animal bond. Tim, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now to share your presentation. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen here, everybody. So I'm going to be talking today about one of the proven strategies that we have. So Best Friends has, we're a data-driven company. So everything that we do, we have kind of data to back up. All of what we have is our proven strategies for best practice. Managed intake, I think, is the one that people have. They don't fully understand what managed intake is. A lot of times when I'm talking to municipal shelters, they think it's a reduction of services, that we're just doing limited intake and things like that. And that is not what it is. So I'll go through, and in this presentation, we'll kind of demystify what is managed intake, what are kind of the processes that we can do, and then we'll actually look at some success cases on a very massive scale. So where we'll start is with the National Animal Control Association. So this is NACA, if you guys aren't familiar with NACA. They're a National Animal Control Organization. They have a position statement which basically states, given the numerous harms and risks associated with unscheduled intake, we recommend all animal shelters replace this practice with an appointment-based system that includes individual assessment and case management approach for all non-emergency requests. And so NACA deals primarily with the municipal organizations that would be your open intake organizations. So a lot of times there's confusion on what limited admissions is versus open intake. We feel that managed intake can work with both. And it is very effective with open admission shelters. So we can actually get this done, actually prevent intakes from coming in and only take the ones that we absolutely have to take in. So this is the ASV guidelines. If you aren't familiar with that, is the Association of Shelter Veterinarians Guidelines for Standards of Care. Where we're going to start is it's kind of hard for us to talk about managed intake without first kind of glossing over and having a very high level approach to like what is capacity for care and what is kind of our length of stay, because this all ties together. If we look at length of stay as kind of the metric that we all should be really focused on, as far as like when animals are coming in, how animals are going out, that sort of thing, our capacity for care is going to be incredibly important. And intake is where we basically start with the capacity for care. So they have, every sheltering organization has a maximum capacity for care, and the population in their care must not exceed that level. So that is with the ASV guidelines. The ASV guidelines is kind of it is what every organization should be doing. They have it tiered now with the latest update that they've done, of which is like bare minimum level of care, emergency care, and then what is kind of what every organization should be doing. So this is one that's their hard gap of like never exceed your population for care. So never exceed that level. So here's a real simple formula. This is a very simplified. Capacity for care is a complicated issue, but if we just boil this down into basically the simplicity of, if we have our daily average intake times our length of stay, that equals our capacity for care. Of course, ideally, we want to have about 10% of our kennels open so that we can have situations for emergency cases, things like that. If we happen to have a hoarding case that we have to come in, we're going to want some buffer in there, and that's where those 10% of kennels comes in. So if you look at your data from last year, take the total number of intakes divided by 365, that gives you your daily average intake. So if you do, say your daily average intake on this one is 5, that's going to be really high. So usually what I find is like most organizations is going to be like, say like, well, 1.5, 1.6, 2.3, something like that. Sometimes it may be 5.6 if you're a large organization. So then the length of stay is the total amount of time an animal is in your care before outcome. So if you take the total number of days divided by the total intake, that'll give you your average length of stay. All of the modern sheltering softwares have a length of stay report that can be generated, but if you're still using spreadsheets, you can just take your outcome date minus your intake date, and that'll give you your total days in care. So if we have, for instance, a daily average intake of say like 1.92 and a length of stay of say 18 days, that would mean that we would need about 35 kennels. Now, we don't really have the ability to adjust kennels except in emergency situations where we could do temporary pop-up kennels while we take in an emergency case, and then we're able to get those into foster and things like that. So we don't count those, but that number is usually a fixed amount. It's usually variable if we can have an influx of fosters and things like that and get animals out. But again, those are usually kind of temporary. So we have kind of a hard stop of whatever your facility is set up as. So the two things that we have to control length of stay is our daily average intake and our length of stay. So if the length of stay increases to 30 days, then ultimately our capacity would go from 35 to 58. And likewise, if the length of stay dropped to 8 days, with the daily average intake staying the same, then our capacity goes from 35 down to 16. So now you can start to see kind of what abilities we have to manipulate the population of a shelter. And so I have actually a video, it's an old ASPCA video that kind of goes over the length of stay, and it's a length of stay game that they used to do at conferences.
Hi there. Today we're going to be playing a learning game.
I hate these mandatory staff meetings.
Now, we all know you love our usual games like Nowhere to Hide But the Litter Box or the Deworming Game. How about a nice banana shake? But today, we're going to play the Length of Stay game. Let's see how thinking about length of stay can make your shelter a happier, healthier place to be so you can save more lives. I just can't wait to see what happens. Here are the rules. We have 2 shelters, Shelter A and Shelter B. Sounds fun, right? Every 30 seconds, each shelter has an intake. One of our fantabulous volunteers comes up and takes a seat in one of these lovely chairs. But here's the trick. In Shelter B, every animal stays for 3 minutes before adoption. In Shelter A, they only stay for 1 minute. So let's divide up into 2 groups and count off by 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, number ones, come on up and get us started. Take a seat, grab an empty cage in your shelter. As we begin, we fast forward through 30 seconds. And at 1 minute, Shelter A is already adopting out their first pet. Now we're at 2 minutes. Yep, another adoption from Shelter A. Way to go! But uh-oh, what's going on in Shelter B? Can't find a seat? Oh, just squish in. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Let's see what's going on in Shelter A. Every time an animal leaves, another comes in, but they aren't filling up. Looks like they've hit their steady state with room to spare. And at 2 minutes 30 seconds, Shelter A is still looking good. How are you guys feeling?
We're awesome. Thanks.
Shelter B? You guys are looking kind of stressed. Oh, I didn't know you weren't feeling well. Tissue? But now it's 3 minutes. Shelter B, it's time for your first live release and one more intake. Looks like Shelter B hit steady state a little harder than they meant to. So what gives? How are you guys feeling?
Not so great.
Shelter A?
We're still good.
Let's think it through a little. We'll start with intake. Which shelter has higher intake? It's the same for both. Which shelter has more adoptions after they hit their steady state? A or B? Adoptions are the same for both. It did take Shelter B a little longer to start releasing, but that was just because we started from 0. Once they got rolling, both shelters adopted out an animal exactly every 30 seconds. Okay, now, which shelter has more animals?
Duh.
So even though everything else stayed the same, they ended up with more to manage at Shelter B. Yep, because the animals stayed longer.
But it was just a little bit longer.
Well, not really. It was actually 3 times as long.
Well, okay, but you made the rules.
But you have the power to change the rules, to fix the process, put an end to endless waiting, put a hold on holding patterns. Shelter B, your turnaround time is making everyone stressed. This cramped feeling is contributing to health and behavioral problems and actually decreasing each animal's odds of being adopted. That's a vicious cycle.
Don't you think we know that? But what can we do?
Let's knock the length out of length of stay. We'll increase overall efficiency. We'll create a no waiting zone for spay and neuter. We'll make prompt, effective treatment plans for animals who need care. What are you waiting for?
I don't need to wait for anything.
Me neither. It doesn't get much cuter than this.
We'll fast-track easily adoptable animals so we can keep them healthy and have more space and resources available for everyone else. Wow, did you see them flying out the door?
But we didn't get to fly.
Sure, but aren't you a lot more comfortable?
Yeah, we are. I'm feeling a lot more adoptable already.
Don't you want to try the length of stay game at your shelter? Check out the resource links on this page for how-tos and case studies from shelters who played and won. Remember, time counts.
So there's a lot of programs that we can do to affect length of stay. Managed intake is one of those programs because it basically length of stay starts upon intake. So what is managed intake? So basically think of like managed intake as the difference between an emergency room and a doctor's office. They're both providing basically the same service, which is treating illness, but the only difference between them is one has appointments and the other one is basically come in at any time, which would be like our open admissions. So managed intake can be thought of as the how and when of intake and refers to any form of regulating or scheduling non-urgent intake. Managed intake may involve simply limiting intake hours, closing night drop boxes, scheduling intake appointments, or developing a formal process for owner surrender interviews with extensive efforts to provide support and alternatives. It also involves identifying local resources that can support pet retention and alternative to intake so that when shelter impoundment is needed, it can be done in a controlled way. So here's a scenario that I was talking with an animal control officer. and we were talking back and forth, and he didn't quite, he thought he was in this kind of like it's a reduction of services. And I said, no, ultimately think of this. We have a municipal shelter that has animal control services. So animal control needs to serve a warrant. So they're going to go out, let's say this is a hoarding situation where they're going to be tasked with removing, say, 30 animals from a home. So they're going to go out 9 a.m. They're going to serve the warrant. So the first trucks are going to arrive on scene at 9 a.m. They plan on having at 10 a.m. the trucks roll at the shelter. So at the shelter, what I would do is I would block off the appointments from 8 a.m. until 1 p.m. where no intakes would be coming in while the officers were on scene. So what I would do on the shelter side is start preparing everything. So since this is more than likely going to be a court case since the warrant was issued, then what we need to do is start documenting every single animal upon intake. We need to start taking photos. We need to do the weights. We need to do all of the things for the court case. And doing so, we need to make very sure that we're not interrupted during this process so that we can build the strongest case. So once the animals start arriving, we start processing them. Once all of the animals are processed, then normal intake resumes. So basically from 1 p.m. until whatever the hours are, say 5 p.m., normal intake would resume just like any normal day. But basically what we've done is we were able to staff appropriately for what was going to be happening on scene with the officers. There's two kind of popular managed intake options, which are scheduled intake, where an agency creates a schedule of how many pets they can take in and on which days, and then owner surrender pets kind of fall around that. This gets a little bit more complicated because we don't exactly know when strays will be coming in. So it's a little bit more difficult to do, but we kind of generally know, say like, oh, we'll have influxes, and you can look at your data to find out when these influx of days come in. Be like, so if animal control doesn't run on Sunday, then we know Monday's going to be a big day because a lot of people had strays running loose that had to come in on Monday or something like that. So we know Monday's going to be a big day. So we know that maybe owner surrenders are not going to come in on Monday, but they would be able to come in on Tuesday. The other is owner surrender hours, where owner surrenders is only scheduled on certain times of the week. So I like this for agencies that maybe don't have a vet on staff, where surgeries are kind of a little bit more difficult. So usually you have partnered with a local veterinarian who's going to be able to do surgeries for you. So if there's an intact animal that needs to come in as an owner surrender, don't bring them in on a Saturday unless you have surgery appointments scheduled for Sunday, which honestly no vet is going to be open on Sunday as far as I know. So let's say that if you have, say, Thursday is going to be our surgery appointments, maybe it's Wednesday, it's going to be a time of the week where the veterinarian is going to be typically slow, where they don't have a lot of surgery capacity. So they're going to offer those slots up to us, say it's Wednesday or Thursday. So let's say it's going to be Thursday. Thursday is a slow surgery day for them. So then I'm going to schedule the intake for Wednesday for that owner surrender so that we can bring the owner surrender, get the animal in, get it to its appointment, get it sterilized, get it on the adoption floor on Friday, and hopefully adopt it on Saturday. So the goal here is always comes back to length of stay. How do we manage length of stay and minimize the time spent in the actual facility? Here is a intake threshold. So this is kind of based on kennel capacity, and this is just kind of a generic threshold. But level 1 is sick and injured. We take these immediately and always. Level 2 basically is for strays, and that is for, if we have 90% capacity in this model. Level 3 is for urgent owner surrenders. Level 4 would be for non-urgent owner surrenders. So the kennel capacity here is just it's just broken down every 25%, but this is something that you within your agency can look at and basically set these thresholds to be like, okay, we are filling up and we are at capacity, so non-urgent owner surrenders are going to have to be bumped. And then as we get to the point where is like we have to take in strays because either we have a contract with a municipality where we have to take in their strays, so that's going to take priority over non-urgent or even urgent owner surrenders at that point. So this is just kind of some thresholds that you can set within your agency to help kind of look at what your intake numbers are going to be. So here is the DACC in LA County. So this is, we were involved with them setting up managed intake. So this is Los Angeles County, not the city of, but this is the county of Los Angeles. So in their 2019, they took in 46,000 animals. So I know that this is a very large organization. When they switched to managed intake the following year and they tracked everything, their intakes went down to 24,856 from 46,000, which is pretty impressive. The um, basically what they have here is this is taken, I don't know if you guys can see this well on your screen, but this is taken from that impact study. So aside from allowing continuity of essential services, these changes have also greatly improved customer service and the ability to provide enhanced care to animals at the Animal Care Center. DACC continues to provide appointment-based and curbside services because these services have eliminated the long in-person lines of the past. So in this organization, there used to be lines that wrapped around the building with people just holding animals on leashes. So you can imagine what sort of scenario that created. And so when they switched to this and they switched to appointment-based systems and they switched to kind of curbside service, so these animals didn't have to stand in line, they stayed in the cars. We did a lot of stuff with them to help kind of get animals into the facility a little bit more safely. DACC recognizes that some animals must be immediately brought to the Animal Care Center for their own safety or the safety of the public. Animals that pose a safety threat are immediately and safely admitted. Animals that are sick and injured are accepted immediately so medical assistance can be provided. Additional situations may include owners' sudden and complete inability to provide care, animal cruelty and neglect cases, and other special circumstances. DACC established same-day appointments to address these special circumstances. So this goes back to that thresholds. So they were able to take in those. They prioritized sick and injured. They prioritized urgent owner surrenders and strays, as well as any court cases that would have come in during that time. So this is Dr. Yamamoto, who's a senior veterinarian at DACC. We noticed that upper respiratory illness in cats and dogs decreased by over 50%. This attributed to not only the fewer animals in the care center, but also fewer people and more controlled environment, contributing to a calmer and healthier experience for the animals. So basically they were also able to nap more, they barked less, they were less stressed because they had half as many animals within the facility. So some myths about managed intake is that it is a reduction of services. Managed intake is actually an increase in services because we are now able to offer counseling to each person and get to the root cause of why they need to rehome a pet. So once we isolate the reason for surrender, we can offer support so they don't actually have to surrender. So rather than saying no to an animal, we are simply saying not right now and figuring out other options beside intake that may be available. When we are talking, what we're talking about is listening to the person that's standing in front of us, which is just really good customer service. Something that is very difficult to do when we're just doing open intake, where we're just taking animals all day long, just take. What we're actually saying is we're going to stop for a minute. We're going to ask some questions and we're going to see if we actually need to take this animal or if there's some support that we can provide so we don't have to take it. So imagine how much more you can serve your community if you're able to spend time with them, work through what is best for the animal and what is best for the family. With managed intake, agencies can smooth out fluctuations in intake of pets, plan for appropriate staffing, and match capacity to provide humane care. If we know that intake is going to increase after, say, the 4th of July, we know that there's always going to be a lot of strays because a lot of the boom booms, they freak out, they break out of their house or their backyard, and they're going to take off running. So what we can do is we can slow intakes prior to the 4th, knowing that we're going to have an influx after the 4th. So we can help kind of smooth out those fluctuations. With an appointment-based system, you can staff appropriately and thus use your funds more responsibly, whether that's tax dollars or that's donor dollars. So you're not having to staff all day and have no intakes come in. So now we can, with the appointments, we can know that, oh, tomorrow we have this many appointments, so I need to staff appropriately. And then you can have minimal staff to deal with the strays that would come in on any other given day. So intake diversion is a term that we like to talk about as intake alternatives. So there's like Meals on Wheels now provides pet food alongside with the human food. DoorDash delivers food pantry items with their Project Dash. Having donated supplies for fences, outdoor housing will help mitigate some of the repeat at-large offenders. Adopt a Pet Rehome is a really good website that allows people to rehome their pets without needing them to bring them to the shelter. And since you guys are all adoption experts, you can give tips on creating a creative bio that'll help get the animal rehomed. Some agencies have a policy where animal control officers must knock on at least 3 doors before bringing an animal to a shelter to try to do return to home in the field. Look at your kind of return to home rates for strays. I heard recently on a national call that there was an agency that had an 80% return rate for strays, which is just unheard of. That's usually around 50, 60% if we're really lucky. So spending a lot of resources on trying to get the strays back home will help reduce the population as well. If someone calls in a contained stray, have them post on the social media site like Nextdoor to see if they can find the owner before animal control has time to go out on the call. So basically, if we can have the community start working for you at help reuniting these pets, then they don't actually have to come into the shelter. So Gateway Pet Guardians in East St. Louis, one of the things that they do is they create laminated sheets like flyers that when they go out and they find strays, that is brought to the shelter. They'll do the intake photos, they print them, they laminate them, and then they go back to the neighborhood where it was found and they tape them to like lampposts and things like that. So if people are looking, they'd be like, oh, I know where my animal is. One Tail at a Time in Chicago offers free ride homes for strays that have been identified, but the owners are unable to make it to the shelter during open hours. So what they do is they load the dogs back up on the ACO trucks, and the ACOs take them and reunite them to their owners. So there's a lot of things that we can do as far as like trying to increase that return to home rate for strays. So this is a quote from Barbara Carr from the SPCA of Erie County. So when they were actually looking at it doing managed intake, and what I found fun with this was these were the things that the staff and I were fully prepared to deal with: the daily arguments from people, cats dumped at admissions, and then while they quickly ran away, bad press, cats in boxes outside our doors, many more reports of abandoned cats. But to our surprise, none of it happened. We have a tendency to spin kind of worst case scenarios, and that fear gets in our way of actually doing change. So if you're freaked out about this, if you're like, oh, I don't think we can do this, you can always do a pilot program for a few months, do a minimum of at least 3 months, and then track the results, track the data. So pilot it, see if it works, see if more, did you have a greater return rate? Were we able to get more abandoned animals, things like that? And then track the results of that and see if this program would actually work in your community. So it's a great way to kind of test the waters before fully committing. The biggest concern is public criticism around the appearance of reduced service hours. Most community members are actually not aware of the process for surrendering an animal until it actually becomes time for them to do it. So when implementing managed intake, make sure that all communication is basically the same. So your website, social media, phone scripts, any public platforms all reflect the same policies and procedure. Having intake alternatives via these platforms will offer the public access to the support that they may not actually need to bring the animal in. So think of the last time you needed to go to the DMV. And so prior to going, you probably looked at the website to find out, one, where is the DMV? And then looked at like what hours were they open, and then what materials you needed to bring. So if you bought a new car, like what do I actually need to bring them? I got a packet from the dealer. What do they actually need for me to get my license plate, kind of a thing. So this is exactly the same for you guys. Is the people actually don't typically know. So if you're going to change it, you can change it, and nobody will even be the wiser because they don't actually use your services that often. Hopefully people are not surrendering pets on a regular basis where they know exactly what your policy is. So if we can set up appointments and then start talking to them, then maybe there is an alternative to actually doing intake. So the purpose of managed intake is to only take in the animals that we need to take in and offer support for those that we don't. We're able to free up resources and better serve those animals that need us the most. So there is a NACA guideline for appointment-based pet intake into shelters document, and this is basically what they say. The purpose of scheduled or appointment policy is to ensure that pets who can be safely cared for in their communities do not have to unnecessarily enter the animal shelter. When effectively implemented, this practice will reduce the population of pets housed in the shelter, help more pets get home faster, improve community health and safety, and reduce shelter-borne illness and behavioral decline associated with crowded animal shelter conditions. Importantly, Managed intake frees up shelter resources to ensure emergencies and critical situations are handled promptly and effectively. Scheduled intake is better for pets, better for people, leads to a healthier and safer community. So that kind of is the general gist of what is managed intake. And so with that, I'm free to answer questions that you all may have of like, what is it? Like, what do we need to do? What does it look like? How do we implement it? So what questions do you all have?
Thanks, Tim, for all that great information. We've been monitoring the chat. There's nothing in there yet. So does anybody have any initial questions that they want to ask of Tim before we come up with something? Anyone?
Hey, Tim, it's Jasmine from the Southeast Kansas Humane Society in Pittsburgh, Kansas. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you, Jasmine?
At full capacity like everybody, but we're
Uh-huh.
hanging in there. So we're getting a ton of jump offs, unfortunately, at the gate. So we've been trying to work on your system that you've been talking about. What really piqued my interest, though, in your conversation right now was your turnaround time of owner surrender. And then like within 2 days, they're up for adoption. We don't have a vet on site, unfortunately. So all of our animals that come through the front door, whether they're owner surrenders or at the gate, they all get a vet appointment, which is taking us about a week to get in just because the vets are slammed here. And then spay and neutering is about 2 weeks. So we're talking about 3 weeks of overtime for each animal that we're getting in. Have you heard of this problem before? And if so, is there a way that we can help tackle this so I can help reduce that timeline?
Yeah, so I think what we need to do is, so if somebody reaches out to you and says, I need to surrender my animal, be like, that's great. Like, what's the situation that is around why do we need to surrender, right?
Mhm.
So if it's like, my grandmother passed away, I can't care for these animals, I don't have anywhere for them, that is one of those urgent owner surrenders. That is a case that we may have to bring them into the shelter. But if it's like, oh, you know what, this dog, it has worms and it's peeing on everything and I just can't deal with it, be like, okay, well, let's talk through some of those things. So if we can work through getting them possibly some over-the-counter dewormer, then that'll take care of the worm issue, and then we can talk about potty training and help guide them through. That is an intake that we could divert, but that
Okay.
takes staff time of having those conversations, and that's what we're ultimately talking about, is how do we get staff time to actually be able to have these conversations to figure whether or not we need to take this animal in. This is something that we absolutely have to. If it is, then it's like, okay, we have to take this in. However, we're booked out a week to 3 weeks for appointments. So it's like, can you house this animal? Let's go ahead. Can you bring it in? Let's do a basic intake. Let's get weight. Let's do, we can get vaccines on board. We can do this and then have them house the animal that's outside the shelter until their scheduled appointment for, say, surgery.
Mhm.
And so then we're able to bring it into the shelter upon that day and then get them surgery and then get them on the adoption floor and hopefully get them out faster.
Gotcha. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, the idea is, how can we, if we're looking at length of stay kind of holistically, if like, what can we do? When do animals need to be brought in to us that can help facilitate them leaving very quickly?
Mhm.
And that's a whole thing. Like I have other presentations that I'll be going over, like as far as like adoptions and pathway planning. And there's one that we're going to be given a pathway planning capacity for care and length of stay presentation. And that dives very deep into length of stay and what are the things that we can do to manage length of stay. But as far as for this conversation, is like length of stay starts upon intake. So we really need to look at intake and find out, do we actually have to take this animal? And what we generally want to have is that the animals that come into the shelter are the ones that need us the most, right? They are the ones that are sick, injured. Maybe they have some behavioral issues that we're able to work through. Whatever the case is, they have housing issues, whether they're being evicted, things like that, relative passes away, things like that. These are animals that actually need us versus animals that actually don't need us and we can solve for with other resources. So that's one, is also look at the human side thing. So if you can't afford to buy dog food, which my God, like I
Yeah.
just recently had to change dog food. The prices of dog food, I'm paying $95 for a bag of dog food to feed my dog. So it's like, That was, I think, $50 like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So I understand, like, when people can't afford food, like this is a very serious time that we're in. But if you're unable to afford food for your animal, can you afford food for your kids? So now we're in the human aspect of things. Look at your counterpart on the human side as far as social work and things like that. And like, let's look at the root cause of the issue and see if we can't solve that. And if we can help get the kids food, we can hopefully help also get the animals food. We keep that family unit better resourced to care for the animal as well as everybody else within that family.
Thank you,
Eh,
Tim. And
yeah.
then I just have a really quick question for Savannah, because you brought up a great point. Savannah, for KDA, for Kansas shelters, what are we legally allowed to give over the counter? Like wormer, I know rabies is a big no-no. What else can we give to the community over the counter that's allowed for Kansas shelters?
Dr. Thomason, are you on here? I'd like to have Dr. Thomason answer that for you since she's our director.
That's probably best to have that discussion with your veterinarian that helps you with your shelter. But usually if you can buy it over the counter, you guys can get it out over the counter.
Okay,
If
thank you.
if it's something you have to get through your vet, then it's a prescription product and it has to go through a veterinarian.
Okay, thank you guys. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, we don't want to be giving antibiotics out, but things like doing basic vaccines for like if there's kennel cough or anything like that, you can go to Tractor Supply and get that stuff over the counter. Like as far as like a Distemper parvo shot, Bordetella vaccines, that sort of stuff, dewormers, that type of stuff. That I was just at a shelter where there was a young couple that came in with this really pretty lab puppy, and they were looking to surrender, and it's like, what's going on? And they're like, he's got worms. It's just like, we got to get rid of him. Like, it's gross. This is disgusting. We have kids. Like, I get it. It's disgusting. It's gross. However, like the shelter was at emergency capacity where they were only taking in urgent owner surrenders. And this was not an urgent owner surrender for them. So basically what I did is like, go to PetSmart, go get you the Panacure, a little granules, put it on the food. That'll deworm the puppy. It's going to be gross because they're going to be crapping out spaghetti. I get it. It's disgusting. But once you go through your 3-day process, he's going to be dewormed. He's great. Now you have a wonderful puppy that you can enjoy and do all this stuff. And they were like, okay, like they just needed somebody to talk to him, just to take him off the ledge of just being like, just talk to him. Be like, what's the issue? Issue? Worms. Worms is something that we deal with every single day, but the public doesn't. It's gross. It's disgusting. But it's something that's easily solvable. It's not anything that I provided to them. I was like, you're still going to have to go to PetSmart. Like, you know, get you some Panacure. But then once they did, able to deworm it, didn't have to surrender the animal. And now we kept a family together.
Thanks, Tim. We do have some questions that are coming up in the chat. Carrie Edwards had asked if you have any SOPs, forms, marketing material, anything along those that you can share that they can modify or they can see if they can implement in their own programs.
Absolutely. So one thing, and I'll share this in the chat. Let me bring up my web browser. We have the Best Friends Network site. So the network site is our repository of everything you could ever possibly want. So I'm going to post that in the chat here. So it's network.bestfriends.org. That is, if you go over to proven strategies and then go down to say like operations, there is going to be foster and adoption in there. There's transport transfer, there's intake medical, there's community cats, everything that you could ever possibly want as far as operational things. There, you're going to find playbooks, you're going to find webinars, you're going to find SOPs, everything that you could ever possibly want will basically be on there. I'll also suggest, like, if you haven't seen like Humane Pro, which is the HSUS's business to business site, and then ASPCA Pro, they all have resources. Between the three of us, national orgs, between Best Friends, HSUS, and ASPCA, you should be able to find pretty much any resource that you need between those three sites.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And then are you going to be able to share the slides that you did today if people would like a copy of them?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want them, just let me know.
Okay, I think some people would like copies of the slides. Tara and Alexis, they both have the same problem. They were looking for some ideas for assisting owners to keep their pets instead of surrendering. Surrendering, as we talked about earlier, a lot of times it's they don't have money to give everyone for food and adequate housing. Alexis says that they don't even take in owner surrenders at their facility, so they're looking for resources to help their community and how to keep those families together, as you say.
Yeah, so that's one that here's the interesting thing, and this is if you guys are familiar with the Human Animal Support Services, the HAAS model, it's using kind of community to help do sheltering and things like that. What they found was when we shift to that community model, we actually get more donations. So, and I have a couple stories on this, but I was working with Siouxland Humane Society, which is up in Iowa, in Sioux City, Iowa. Jerry got a grant, or it was a bequest. It was somebody had passed away, and they left the shelter $200,000. Now you're all thinking that's amazing, except it was all earmarked. They could only use the funds to help the community. So then he was just like, this was kind of in that just starting with kind of the HAAS stuff. So he was just like, I don't know how to do this. So in the first year, they basically just were hemorrhaging cash. They were spending it all. They were spending all this money to help keep pets in the home. And when they started to market with it, the donations that they got after they started marketing using We're Keeping Families Together was 3 times what they were when it was help Fluffy with the broken leg. So, when we're doing the direct mail pieces where we have the x-ray and we're like, oh, poor Fluffy came in with a broken leg. We were able to fix the animal. With donations from people like you, we were able to do this, and we will continue doing this to help Fluffy. When the marketing changed to we're helping keep families together, and this is what we're doing in our community to help the community, now you're breaking outside of animal welfare into people that want to donate to help people. So animal welfare only, if we're looking at the pie chart, is only about 2 to 3% of total donations. So we can increase our donations if we start increasing our awareness of working with the community. So that's one. Secondly, I have a territory of 5 states. Kansas is one of them, but it's Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, and Wisconsin are the states that I provide support to. And in Lincoln, Nebraska, there's Capital Humane Society. What Matt Macharo did there, he's the executive director there, was he looked at his cost per animal. How much does an animal cost the shelter? So he just took his budget divided by the animals coming in, like total intake, budget, that gives you a cost per animal. And that's the easiest way to do it. But he found that it didn't matter, dog or cat, he doesn't care. Any animal entering in the facility costs the facility $500. So what he did was he authorized his adoption staff. He gave them a budget of $250 to solve the issue. So if you're looking at your total budget, he was just like, if you can solve the issue for $250, you just save the shelter $250 by us not having to take in that animal. So it's a different approach than we start thinking about, like, oh, in order for us, like if we were to take this animal in, it's going to cost us X number of dollars. If we were to take half of that and solve the issue, I just saved the organization this amount of money by not taking the animal in. Now, I will say, working for an organization that does give out grants, we still look at like, what is your total intake? What is your budget? All of that kind of old school approach. If you're doing this community kind of supported work, make sure you're keeping track of it. So have a spreadsheet and be like, we spent this amount, this animal didn't come in, this was the result, because then you can offer that with the grants, be like, this is the work that we're doing. So Gateway Pet Guardians was the first one to kind of do this. HAAS was built basically from the model that Gateway Pet Guardians did. I don't know if you know much about East St. Louis, but it's a rough part of town. Like they serve 4 zip codes that the police don't even go into, and this is what the shelter decided that they were going to support. So I was at a presentation with Jamie Case, who was the executive director there at the time, and I was just like, I'm trying to wrap my head around like the size of Gateway Pet Guardians. So I was like, what's your average intake? She's like, I don't know, like 500. I'm like, and what's your budget? She said $2.5 million. So of course I'm thinking, I was like, you spent $2.5 million on 500 animals. And she's like, no, dum-dum, didn't you see my presentation? I spent $2.5 million so we didn't have to take in 3,000 animals. So, and that's where we need to start changing our mindset of how we are spending our money is not necessarily directly tied to the animals that are in our care, but it's supporting the community. And it's a community approach of actually finding out what is the need that the community has, and how do we support that need so they don't have to bring us the animals. So the other thing that I really like doing is heat mapping where your intakes are coming from. So you can go into Google Earth, or there's Google Maps. It's kind of, you need to look at like what you need as far as like addresses to put in there, but you can export from your shelter software generally like, oh, we got this in. If it's a cross street, it's not going to work. If it was like 4th and Main, it's not going to put a pin. We generally need to have an address, but you can put that, upload that into Google Maps, and that'll create little pins, and you can create a heat map of where your intakes are coming in. So if we have a massive stray intake, say on the south side of town, why are there more strays on the south side of town? Let's have an investigation. Let's figure that out. Let's go to that community and find out, is there a need that they have? Is there a cultural difference that we have with them where animals are they just run loose? Like that's just what they have. Let's start having communication around what the laws are and how we have to keep animals contained. And we can start working with the leaders that are in these communities to start driving that change. Like we're not going to go in there throwing our elbows around and being like, you need to do this or that. Let's find out who's already doing the work in those communities and let's partner with them. Everything that we do is about partnerships. What managed intake is about is about partnerships. Is how do we help the communities so we don't have to take in these animals? Like, let's look at what we have on the human counterpart side. If there's a food bank, can we provide them with pet food so that there's a one-stop shop? They can get pet food and human food. Like they don't have to come to us for pets, and like we just need to start working together. There's other things like there's the rescue bank and things like that. If you're looking at like inexpensive food or free food, there's different things that we can do to find out, like ultimately it's the conversation. What is the need? And what do we have the capacity to help with? And then if we don't have the capacity, how do we find that capacity? So then this is one of the things that we do is for our strategic plan. It's like, we need to grow these programs. What does that look like for the next 2 years? Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to partner with? Who's already doing this work? What is a good agency that's doing it that we can call and find out, how are you doing this? There's a lot of really great shelters within the state of Kansas that you guys can contact. Like we're all willing to work with each other. Like we just need to talk to each other. And so that's where we can reach out. I'm sure that we can find, a contact at a given shelter. You can always reach out to me and be like, do you have a contact with any of these people? Find out who's doing the work, find out how they're doing it.
Thanks. Joan, I think you had your hand up.
Hey, get that off there. Yeah, me and my mom, Joyce, are with Bunny TNT. And I was kind of interested in the idea of the length of stay, because for us, we have to vet the people asking for rabbits. So length of stay has to be a little bit longer for us. And of course, right now we are entering in another season of demand, you might say, for rabbits, where we end up having to field a lot of calls and explain to people that no, your 3-year-old does not need a bunny for Easter. So we're kind of wondering, it's like, how do you manage some of that where yeah, you have to balance the idea of, yeah, the rabbits need to get into a new home, but it needs to be a good home.
So I think that this is a good like adoptions presentation that would be like open adoptions and things like that.
Yeah.
Where I would guide you now is to look at the HSUS Adopters Welcome. That is probably the best resource for open adoptions. I'll be going over some of this in a future presentation as well, but it is getting rid of some of the fear that we have on like the vetting that we have to do. Like is there something that we can do as far as like, if somebody's interested in a bunny, maybe fill out a questionnaire and you're good. Like, do we actually have to do a home visit, things like that? Because how often are we actually finding things in these home visits? Like if we can just have a conversation with somebody, and I'm not really a big fan of forms because people can just lie, right?
Yeah.
Just pick up the phone and call somebody. Basically be like, we're not going to make you jump through all of these hoops. I'm just going to have a conversation with you. I understand like you're dealing with a species of animals that generally sometimes have very special needs. And so it's just, like the question is like, have you ever had an animal like this before? And be if it's no, and be like, tell me about that. Like, what makes you interested in this? And at some point, like, I think that there's always this fear of like when we're dealing with animals and we're like, we want people that are experienced. I hear that a lot. It's like, you need to be an experienced dog owner for this dog. And I'm like, but if they're interested in the breed, they've done the research of the breed, they've gone all the way through all of this, like, why wouldn't we give them the shot and then support them through that process? Because at some point they're gonna do this anyways. They're gonna get an animal, whether it's through you or it's not through you. So what I always prefer is like, we become the experts then. Like, you are clearly the experts in this field. So let's leverage your experience to be like, you know what? Yeah, go ahead, take this. We'll follow up with you. If you have any concerns, any issues like that, any issues with care, let us know. Like, and if it's like, even if it's like, trimming like nails and things like that, like, we'll show you how to do that. With parrots, it's like trimming beaks in like clipping wings, things like that. It's like, we can show you how to do that for a first-time bird owner, but we'll support you in that process. And then you become the expert. I always like that, rather than it's just kind of like, oh, you guys don't really know what you're doing. You're just trying to, get animals out. You don't really care. It's like, no, we do care. That's why we're doing this. And we're very good at it, and we're very experienced, and we are the experts. So let's treat us as if we are experts. You guys have more knowledge than the general public. But most people don't think of going to a shelter to get expertise knowledge about their animals. So we need to start changing that narrative and doing that. So it's definitely something that I would look at your policies and be like, what are we actually gaining by having these policies in place? Like, yes, like the child may not need a bunny for Easter, but that's the conversation that we need to have. Basically be like, why did you do this? Why do you want this? Like, is this something like, has this child grown up and has always wanted a rabbit and you think this is the right time? I'll give it a shot and see. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Then we can, take the bunny back and then rehome it, and things like that. But at least they tried, and we supported them in that process. And I think what you'll find is that if we can remove some of these barriers and these fears that we have around these adoptions, that a lot of times our fears are unwarranted. Like, yeah, you're going to get some returns. It's some of them aren't going to stick, but there's going to be more that do than the ones that don't. And I think that's the difference in the mindset of like, when we're looking at what our impact is and what our length of stay is, how many animals we can serve, what the community needs, like removing some of these barriers and these fears, you will find that you're able to get more animals through the system and get more animals homed, and thus you're able to save more.
Crystal had a pretty similar question to the reducing the length of stay when she's having trouble with anybody accepting transfers. There's very few fosters and the pets are just not going out to adopters.
Yeah, that's welcome to, sheltering in America right now. It's the transport partners some of them are opening back up a little bit, but for me, it's always about, let's enrich them while they're in our care as much as we possibly can. But it's also look at your adoption policies, like look at your open hours, look at your ability to get animals out. Are we going to offsite events? Are we getting them into the community? Do we have vests that we can put on them and then take them on a parade in town? Can we take them to parks? Are we our fosters and volunteers allowed to take animals out and do, like a dog day out or a sleepover or things like that we can help get them to start marketing for us. So during sleepovers, a lot of times they will post these animals on social media. That's more marketing exposure. Like, let's look at our bios. Or do we have stuff in here of restrictions of like, no kids, no blah, 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 have to have this, blah, blah, blah. Or are we just creating all these barriers? Now, these are all, if that is the case, we can have that conversation upon adoption, but we're putting these barriers up where they just keep scrolling. Well, let's look at our, photos, videos, that sort of stuff. What we find is that if we can get photos with people, animals and people, they can picture themselves in those scenarios instead of just photos of animals. If we know that an animal is really good with children, or they do a sleepover or something like that, having photos with kids, heads cut off, otherwise we got to get, model releases, all this other stuff. But basically we can show like this animal is good with a child, then they can actually, adopters can see, be like, oh, well, here's a photo with the animal with the child. Clearly this is okay. Then we can actually start marketing it for those kind of homes. Basically be like, you know, the dog days out are great. Just get them out of the shelter and in a new experience, and we get more information. If we're unsure of a dog or its behavior, we need to test it. So if we have like a volunteer or a trainer that would take an animal home for a night and see how it is with their dogs, then we get more information. And if not, be like, basically, if we can partner with a trainer to do that, basically be like, I need you to evaluate this dog. Can you take it home for the night? Put it in with your pack, see how it does. If it's good, then write up a little scenario on what it did, and we can put that into the bio. If it's like, oh yeah, no, absolutely not, this dog needs some work, and be like, well, what kind of work would it need? And then we put that in there. There's things like Good Pup, the app, the dog training app. So this is, you know, dog trainers. It's like it's a Zoom dog trainer, right? It's like telehealth, but for dog training. And so every single person has the ability to have an affordable dog trainer. And then U.S. shelters can actually, there's Good Pup has a program where you can do, there's 2 different programs, but you can either pre-purchase training or you can do credits that have to be used within like 7 days or something like that. So if somebody calls and they're like, oh, we have an issue with this, basically be like, use this coupon, contact Good Pup, talk with the trainer, see what they say. And then if it goes awry or if it's not working, then we can have a conversation about, you know, potentially an intake of what it would look like for the shelter, things like that. There's a lot of options there of increasing adoptions. Just look at every single thing that you're doing and see what can we add.
What about your policy on returning an animal that's been adopted out? Do you guys have any policies that you fall to for that?
One, it's kind of there's always what is a return? Like how long is it before a return is not a return? So some agencies is like for the life of the animal. So if you adopt a puppy, you can return it when it's 11 years old and it counts as a returned adoption. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that. A lot of agencies kind of put just random times of like 30 days. After 30 days, it becomes an owner surrender because it's kind of that, you know, 4-week rule. Some people are the 4-month rule. After 4 months, they would know, you know, kind of the dog would settle down if it's going to be a good fit or not. It's up to you as far as what you have as far as the policy goes. But then ultimately for me, it's always post-adoption support. So a lot of times what I found was, I found this with the shelter that I worked at, was we would just adopt animals out. And then animals would come back and then we would have conversations with them. And it was like, well, if we did our follow-ups 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and had communication with them all throughout that process, we actually could mitigate the return by offering the support before it got to the point where they were over the edge. Basically be like, this dog's chewing on a lot of stuff. Okay, yeah, let's not get to the point where it chews up your AirPods and your, you know, shoes and all this other stuff where you're just like, this has caused like $2,000 worth of damage. I can't deal with this dog anymore. Because at that point, you're over the edge. Let's mitigate that before it gets to that point. So the returns, let's have points of contact. We're regularly contacting our adoptions to make sure that everything's fitting, and then mitigating them is a way of doing intake diversion and or pet retention so they stay in the home.
Amanda, same kind of thing. I think one of the biggest struggles, like we talked about, is we have a lot of small town shelters that even if they are trying to get, you know, social media presence, pet finder page and websites and flyers and whatnot, and keep their fees low, they just can't seem to get the increase in adopters.
Yeah, and I will totally plug Daniela, who put her email address in there, from Humane Society of Greater Kansas City. They are just smashing it at GKC. Like all the programs that they are doing, Daniela would be a great presentation. If you guys are looking for speakers, she was another one of like, they basically just completely revamped how everything, all of the policies and procedures that they're doing at Greater Kansas City, and they are just absolutely smashing it. So if you do have concerns about length of stay, managed intake, I mean, even open adoptions, reach out to Daniela. She's a very wealth of information, of hands-on knowledge that just basically went through this and has current data on what she was able to do at Greater Kansas City.
So, and thank you, Daniela, for putting your information in there. That's great to give support to other people. Let's see. Anybody, am I missing anybody's hand up? Does anybody have any questions for Tim?
I have one more, Tim. It's Jasmine again. What's the usual time for spay and neuters? We usually have a 7-day quarantine hold. Is that too much?
Next day,
Okay. All right.
there's no
didn't-
reason to quarantine hold anybody.
Okay, got it. It's been
mean,
in our
unless they're-
book for like 20 years. So I wanted to
Yeah.
double check if there was
Mm.
something with KDA that, but it can be next day.
No,
Okay.
there's no, a lot of times I hear that as like, oh, they're on a Parvo watch to
Uh-huh.
see if they're on a URI watch. Well, like for me, it was like the stress of the shelter is going to take effect after 7 days, to the point where if they haven't broken with a URI, they will, because now we've just stressed them out for 7 days. So the idea is let's not like unnecessarily increase length of stay. Like there's no reason for a holdup for a like, oh, we're just going to test them out for 7 days and not take them out of a kennel for 7 days and just make them sit and freak out with all the loud barking and stuff like that. Let's not do that. Let's just
it.
get them in, get them vaccinated, get them surgery, get them on the adoption floor, hopefully get them into like play group like immediately. Let's get all of that stuff done. Let's find out all of the information. The whole idea is, if we're thinking about length of stay and reducing length of stay, it was when we bring them in, when they go out, and in that process of in between, of like, we need to think about every single thing that we can do to shorten that, and what is blocking, what barriers have we put up unnecessarily. And a lot of it is like fear. Well, we had a really bad parvo outbreak once, so therefore every single animal has to sit for 7 days to make sure we don't have to go through this awfulness ever again. And it's just like, no, let's not do that. Like let's get them on the floor as fast as humanly possible. Let's start marketing them. Let's get information. And so we can find that, that fit that's going to be a good fit, and let's get them out.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. So as far as funding and resources and getting the help that they need, especially if people want to get started on taking a whole look at their program and revamping, when it comes to your guys' support, is this a matter like we can have people reach out to you and best friends can help
Yeah.
get that process started?
Yeah, here, I put my email. It's just timy@bestfriends.org. Feel free to email me. I do have some resources. If we can't provide it, I do have a list of some kind of grant opportunities that are out there that may or may not work with some of the stuff. If you're not a network partner, follow that Best Friends at Network Partner. But we do have a Rachel Ray grant cycle. That's our big grant every year. So you have to be a network partner in order to become eligible for that. So on that main page of the network site is the application to become a network partner, and that would make you eligible. It opens up every fall. So the grant cycle is closed right now, but it'll open back up in October. And so that's kind of the big one. So if you're looking for funding, it's a good place to start. We can start having conversations around, what funding looks like, looking at kind of your policies and procedures, and kind of, if you want me to kind of look at the general operations, you can send me your files. I can look at them, be like, yes, there's no reason why you need to have these in place. You should put these in place, all of this stuff. Like, this is what I'm here for, is to provide support for you guys.
Great. And then I had another question. I think it's been brought up to me before outside of this, but we do have some areas throughout Kansas that have like specific breed bans and things of that sort in cities or counties and whatnot. And I know some of the rescues struggle that are allowed to take in these breeds, but they may have an area around them that makes it difficult to adopt them out. Do you guys have any advice on those kind of situations?
Yeah, let's get those ordinance changed. Yeah.
Is that something that you guys do? Do you help? Or...
Yes, we definitely do. I have a BSL calculator that I can send you that would basically be like, this is how much the city, you can plug in all the information and basically it'll kick out like, this is how much a general BSL case would cost the city to basically prosecute, and things like that. And we have all the data. We actually have kind of some lawyers that all they do is BSL. So that would be, we have a ton of resources as far as like, if we want to try to start educating city leaders and things like that. But it's going to have to be like, you're going to have to pick up the charge. Like, I can't go and talk to the city council because I don't live there. Like, they're not going to listen to me. Like, I can be brought in as kind of an expert on the subject of BSL, but like, it's going to have to be people from the community in they're basically the voting members, because then ultimately it comes around to, if somebody is term is going to be ending and they're going to, be on the city council again, let's start having some conversations about changing some of these ordinances so that we can, rally some troops around getting these things changed. Ultimately, we're in support of dangerous dog legislation instead of breed specific. Like, let's encompass everything. If the dog is dangerous, it's not going to be because of the breed. So let's just encompass all dangerous dogs and not be breed specific. That's what our support is. We have some documents, and there is one. It's on the network site, but it's called People, Pets, and Policy, and that was our partnership with the International Municipal Lawyers Association. So these are all city attorneys. They all got together and they created a document that is kind of policies and sample ordinances. And we have sample ordinances and a bunch of different stuff that we have of what kind of a good dangerous dog legislation would look like. So instead of just basically be like, we're going to overturn BSL, basically be like, we're going to get rid of the breed part of BSL, but we are going to put in place a dangerous dog legislation so we can still protect the community. So that is what we support, and we have resources in order to do that. And if you're like, I don't know, this website there's a lot of stuff, just reach out to me. I have those broken out. So if you're looking at breed specific legislation stuff, I can send those to you.
Awesome, thank you. I hope that was helpful for anyone. Does anybody else have any questions? I want to let you all know, I know quite a few people had said that they'd like copies of the slides. So this entire presentation is going to be recorded and it'll be posted hopefully sometime next week online. And then if Tim sends over the slides to us, we can post a copy of the slides as well. And then Kitty will send out a notification to you guys when everything is posted, and you can go ahead and go on the website and download all that stuff for yourself. Anyone else that I'm missing? Don't see, and like Tim said, his address is in the chat box. He's real easy to talk to. I'm sure you guys can guess. All right, well, Tim, again, thank you so much for your time and your expertise this afternoon. Everybody, our next webinar is going to be February 14th at noon. So look for an email around early February with the webinar information. I will let you know, I know that we had a cancellation of our cat and dog behavior enrichment webinar. We are rescheduling that. We had some that are already laid out with Tim here, and so we'll be putting it at the end of the other ones that he's doing, but we will be rescheduling that one. So again, you guys have a great afternoon, and thank you for coming, and thank you for your support. If you guys have any questions, be sure to reach out to Tim. You can reach out to Daniela. You can reach out to us. And yeah, you guys stay safe with the weather and have a good afternoon.
All right, bye, everybody.